says she put her trust in an officer of the law when he cautioned her about a dangerous rapist on the loose. Then she says she found herself the victim of a cruel practical joke that backfired. Doug Bruckner has the story.
There was a time when Tammy Jean Hughes had the biggest smile of anyone at the Roadrunner Market.
I just thought, I was dead. I didn't know what else to think.
And now she cries the biggest tears of anyone in Jonesboro, Tennessee.
Everybody thought it was funny, and it was not funny. I didn't like nobody thinking it was funny.
There was a time when no one supported her local police more than Tammy Jean Hughes.
Now I just look at a cop and, I don't know what they're there for.
But Tammy Jean says the police made her cry, and they laughed at the tears they caused. Now, Tammy Jean Hughes won't stop until the ones who made her cry are crying too. Because, you see, everyone in Jonesboro is learning that Tammy Jean's tears are no joke.
I just can't understand why he would do something like that, thinking it was a joke. That was the furthest thing from a joke.
It all began late one night in January. Tammy Jean was working the night shift at the Roadrunner Market. She didn't get all that much business, just a few kids with munchies looking for a moon pie, someone picking up tomato juice for that hangover breakfast. And among the regular customers were the local cops, good old boys like Officer Tommy Remine. They'd stop in for coffee and a chat, check on Tammy, and make sure none of the locals were giving her a hassle or trying to steal a beer. But Tammy Jean says Officer Remine had a mission when he pulled into the Roadrunner parking lot that night.
Tommy came in and got coffee, and then he'd leave, and then he'd come back, and he told me that there was a rapist, murderer, whatever, from, Johnson City, at least from there, and they thought they were, he's coming through Johnson City, or Jonesboro, I'm sorry. And he told me he's an older guy, he had long, stringy blonde hair for me to be, watch out on him, and then he left. When somebody tells you something like that, and you're working third shift, you're sitting on pins and needles anyway.
Tammy Jean says it was scary enough to be working alone, wondering if the next one through the door would be the Johnson City killer rapist. But then Tommy Remine returned to show her exactly what the criminal looked like.
So ugly, the sketch of him was just, scary looking to look at the sketch.
Tammy Jean says Officer Remine left, leaving her alone, watching the clock, waiting for her shift to end, knowing she was the only light on in town. Then, in the darkest hours of the morning, he came in.
I was standing there straightening up the magazines, and the door beeps, when it opens, and it beeped, and I looked over. And when I looked over, I saw this, this mask, from here up. And I just dropped the magazines in my hand, and I didn't know what to do.
Tammy Jean says her blood ran cold. The rapist was in her store, and the only thing between Tammy Jean and sure death was the telephone. Imagine her surprise when she dialed 911.
I picked up the phone and I called Jonesboro Police Department. And he said, Jonesboro Police Department. I said, this is Tammy from Roadrunner. And he, laughed at me.
Tammy Jean says she couldn't believe her ears. The rapist was after her, and the cop on the phone was laughing like an idiot. She dropped the phone, and then the rapist dropped his mask. She says it was Officer Remine.
And I was in tears. Tommy had the mask in his hand, and he said, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't know it'd scare you that bad. I didn't mean to do it, I didn't think it'd upset you that bad. I was just crying and crying and crying.
Yes, she says the story of the Johnson City rapist was a crock. Seems the cops on the night shift got a little bored and decided to play a trick on Tammy Jean. But Tammy Jean didn't think it was funny. In fact, she couldn't stop crying. Next day, she went to the cops on the day shift to file a complaint. But they were laughing, too.
He just thought it was funny. He just laughed, and he said I needed to call, the chief of police. And then I talked to somebody else, and they told me, not to call him because they were all, the chief and the captain, and then the cop that did it was all buddy-buddy.
Tammy Jean turned to the one authority figure who wouldn't laugh at her mother.
He's a little boy in a big, in a uniform. And I think he thinks he can get away with anything just because he wears a uniform.
Tammy Jean says the laughter made her tears turn bitter. These cops weren't going to get away with it. She went past the police to City Hall and called the mayor.
It was hard for us to believe that an officer would feel comfortable in pulling a prank and thinking that this kind of an activity would be humorous.
Tammy Jean didn't give up. She pushed until the prankster cops were called on the carpet. Supervisor Sherry Jeanan got demoted. The laughing dispatcher got a pay cut. Officer Remine was suspended for 3 days.
I don't think 3 days was enough for what he did. No officer in a uniform on duty should pull anything like that on anybody.
Frankly, she wanted the man fired, and I don't think that her feelings about that are unjustified in any way.
Tammy went back to work at the Roadrunner Market, but it wasn't easy. The usual troublemakers continued to show up, but the police didn't.
Not one Jonesboro cop pulled in the parking lot after it hit the newspaper on my shift. I would pull up to come to work, and one of them would be in the building, and they'd leave as soon as I'd get there, and they wouldn't come in the rest of the night.
Then her boss started giving her the cold shoulder. She says they didn't like all the bad publicity the store was getting. She had to quit. What could Tammy Jean do but cry? One thing she could do was hire a lawyer. He helped Tammy Jean file a lawsuit against Tommy Remine and his boss.
This lawsuit really is about money. If we can impress upon him the responsibilities that he assumes when he puts on that uniform and that badge, we will have accomplished something. It seems to me that the way we'll impress that upon him is by taking a little bit of money out of his pocketbook.
Tammy Jean turned 21 last week. Some folks in town say she doesn't have much of a sense of humor, but Tammy Jean says she hasn't been the same since the cops pulled that prank. But she's sure of one thing: if anyone gets the last laugh in Jonesboro, it'll be her.
Never heard of a joke like that. I mean, sure, there's people that pop out behind doors and, jab you in the sides to, startle you,